So the LCD2C, it's kind of, for me, the golden standard for a planar magnetic headphone between $500 and $1,000. I don't think it's the best headphone as an overall category, but I do think it is probably the best planar in that price range that I've tried due to my personal preferences. Basic premise, the EditionXX is an amazing $600 headphone coming out of MASSDROP. It's a Headphone MASSDROP collaboration. I believe it's their fourth. It is a little bit cheaper than the LCD2C. The 2C is coming in at $800. We're gonna reapproach price near the conclusion of this, but for now we're kind of gonna disregard it. And the reason why I'm comparing a $600 versus an $800 headphone is because, one, it's not that much more if you're talking about that much money anyways. And two, it's really the sound signatures that are quite similar. I did think about comparing the Ananda, which I also have here, against the LCD2C, but those sound signatures are so different that, you know, if you watch each of my reviews, the Ananda review is coming out soon. If you watch each of my reviews, you'll know which one is tailored to you and which one's not with that. So with this, they're similar. So I'm hopefully going to direct you on which one I think is worth it, which one is a better value, and which one suits your needs better. So for building comfort and specs, you know, comfort is going to be a subjective thing. Your comfort is going to be drastically different than mine. My preference here is certainly the EditionXX. I actually like this headband a lot, and I like the ear-shaped cups that they use for my head shape and size. This works magically and it's extraordinarily comfortable. The LCD2C is comfortable as well, but the comfort definitely goes to the EditionXX. Now, when it comes to build quality, there's no denying it. The LCD2C is built better by quite a large margin. The pads feel better. The materials that were used, it just feels more solid. It even feels more secure on your head, even though it is heavier. There's a lot of things quality-wise that are going for the LCD2C that the EditionXX does not have. The EditionXX is lighter, but it does feel, cheaper. It honestly doesn't feel nearly as high quality as the LCD2C. So if you're a quality of feel type of guy, you're definitely going to appreciate the build quality of the LCD2C. Now, both of these planars are fairly revealing when it comes to amplifiers. I would say the LCD2C is more revealing. I tested both of these off of the Topping DX7S, my AAA 789, Objective 2 amps, a Liquid Spark, a pretty big versatility of amplifiers. And the one I was able to tell the most difference on was certainly the LCD2C. So an amplifier for both of these is recommended. So sound-wise, both these headphones are actually a little bit similar. In fact, the reason why I'm doing this comparison is because when I first heard the EditionXX, the first thing I thought of was the LCD2C. I was like, oh, that's really similar to the LCD2C. And with further inspection, it's not exactly identical, of course. There's some pretty major key differences, but they both have kind of a boost in the bass, a boost in the mid-range, and slightly rolled off kind of classic planar treble. And from the Headphone side of things, this is actually kind of cool to see, because normally, with most of their headphones, they go for a very clinical sound, especially they're like under $1,000 headphones. Those are very, very clinical for the most part, like your Sundaras or your Anandas. Those are pretty critical sounding headphones. Not the most critical, but definitely more than this is. And this kind of has your more smooth, laid back feel. And that's really what reminded me of the LCD2C. Now, what I didn't recall from memory was the difference in the approach of the sound. And that's one of the key differences here. And that's what we'll talk about first, I guess. So the EditionXX it's actually a more spacious sound. I don't think it actually sound stages as wide, or it doesn't have the perception of sound staging as wide. I've actually talked about this in a couple of videos before, but soundstage perception is one of those things that can really be influenced by whatever the starting point is, right? So if a headphone has, the closest it can sound is here, and the furthest it can sound is way out here, it doesn't really feel like that big of a difference. But let's say a different headphone can start like right here, right in the center of your head, but it only goes this far. That actually, it kind of gets perceived as a larger distance because your starting point is closer and you have something to compare it to. And that's kind of the case with this. The XX it's a more spacious, overall wider field of sound when you first put it on, especially the vocal department. But when you go to the LCD2C, that is a much more intimate kind of sucked in sound where it's a lot closer, it's a lot more forward and more finite in the center. But the soundstage, you know, I'm perceiving it as being a little bit wider and more capable. Now, the other factor to this is imaging, and I don't want to spoil too much about the review of the EditionXX, but the imaging on it is not really the best at the price. Certainly compared to the LCD2C, the imaging just doesn't really quite compare. You're able to place things, especially due to that soundstage capability, you're able to place things a lot easier in the room in a listening environment on the LCD2C than you are the EditionXX. Okay, so the next biggest difference is actually going to be the bass. So the way I would kind of describe these two headphones is like the XX feels more as part of the music. It feels, you know, when you hear a guitar, it doesn't feel like this bassy monstrosity coming at you. It feels like part of a deep guitar or a deep vocalist. You really feel like it is part of what they are singing or what the instrument is playing. And it doesn't really feel necessarily separated from the music, but it's also not brought up a ton compared to other Planars. Now, the bass on the LCD2C is, in my opinion, it's pretty spectacular. I really like it because it is brought up a little bit more. It is a little bit more emphasized. You can really feel the impact of the low end on the 2C, and that makes for a very fun listening experience if you like bass. Now, it's not the heaviest bass headphone out there, not by any means. I think in the $600 to $500 category, if you really love bass and that's all you care about, I'd get like DT1770s, the closed version of the DT1990s. Those things are really bassy, and if you like that, it's really fun. But as far as like slam and that, you know, that classic planar flatline bass all the way down to 20 hertz does that quite a bit better. So it has a little bit more meat down at the lower end, whereas the XX comparatively kind of slowly slopes down. You know, 90 hertz to about 120 hertz is about the same level. And then, you know, if you imagine, if the 2C is the standard between these two, and you'd consider that to be a flat line all the way down, this is kind of, you know, just a little bit of a slope downwards, and continues on that slope until it hits about 20 hertz. So for quantity, I definitely give it to the 2C. For quality though, that is actually a little bit of a toss-up, and I think it really depends on what you consider to be you know, a better technical performance. On one hand, I would say, well, you know, if the artist mixed it to be incredibly bassy and deep and rich, and the 2C plays that a little bit better, then that might be the better reference. Or maybe not the better reference, but, you know, better technically. But then on that argument, you could also say, well, you know, guitar doesn't necessarily sound super deep and bassy unless you're like, you know, the microphone's on or in the guitar, right? It doesn't really sound like that if you're listening to it in an environment. And the XX provides that more environmental sound because of the spaciousness of it. So quality over quantity, and that quantity argument is definitely going to be dependent upon what you personally like. So just know where the limitations of that are. I'm not going to consider one to be better than the other necessarily here. I like the LCD2C more towards my personal preference, but that is just me. So the way that the bass transitions into the mid-range, also fairly intriguing to me, because it actually feels a bit smoother and more connected on the XX. And like I said, it feels a little bit disconnected on the 2C. Now I like that sort of, you know, disconnected feel where you've got, you know, your instruments and your singers all happening, and those real low notes are really like coming from the depths, and they're kind of gripping you. And, you know, you can, you know, in a way it feels separated from the music, not in a delayed standpoint or an overly bloated standpoint. It just, I don't know, it feels like almost as if it, and kind of what it just feels like another type of sound. It feels like another instrument. The XX does feel more connected, especially to vocalists. And I think it's because, you know, when you have a headphone that, you know, kind of emphasizes the bass response quite a bit, like the 2C, you can get somewhat unnatural vocals. Like the vocals are great on the 2C. We'll talk about that in a second. But regarding the bass response and how it transitions there, you know, most singers, even singers like Avi Kaplan, you know, if you're listening to them in a room, they don't sound nearly as bassy as they do on some of the tracks on the 2C, whereas they feel more natural on the XX. So speaking of those vocals, for me, this is kind of a you know, hands down winner to the 2C. And that's just because of how kind of rich and lush and just is super, super enjoyable the 2C is. The XX is very good, but you know, where the XX has its benefits and its drawbacks that we'll talk about in the full review, it has those benefits and it has those drawbacks for the vocals. You know, it's got certain points that are great, certain points that are not so great, specifically in the separation department. The 2C just pulls light years ahead, and there is not a weak point in vocals that I can find on the 2C. You know, there may be other headphones that are better technically, have better separation, but as far as like a problem or something I don't like about the vocals or something I do not enjoy about the vocals, it does not exist for me on the 2C. Whereas the XX, I think it could do a little bit better. So we're gonna pause the review for just a sec. If you are a vocal person, I'm telling you right now, the headphone you will appreciate more is gonna be the 2C. It's more intimate, it's a more immediate delivery, it's more rich, it's more lush, it just feels like you're being hugged by this person's mouth, and that sounds really dirty, but that's what it feels like. Okay, now we're gonna unpause and go to the treble department. The treble is, see, this one is it's interesting. Both of them kind of have, you know, their hills and valleys, just like every other headphone does in the treble department. It's got certain frequencies that it's good at. Both, as an overall category of that treble performance, they're both a little bit dipped down compared to the mid-range and the bass response. And, you know, this kind of provides a more laid-back feel on both of these headphones. I mean, I can literally point to specific like time codes in specific songs that each of these headphones does better. For example, the Within track from Daft Punk that I brought up in the EditionXX review, I think it's 43 seconds in, there is a center cymbal, and the 2C displays the immediacy of that cymbal, the kind of presence of that cymbal in the center room better than the XX does, but the XX does handle the decay a little bit better and the spaciousness of it a little bit better. Then you would go to something like Sinead O'Connor's The Foggy Dew, and that song, about 14 seconds in, I think it is, has kind of a center drum, and that actually hits harder and more presently on the XX than it does on the 2C. So there's examples and examples on both sides where I can really go back and forth. I do think as an overall, when it comes to detail retrieval, I think the 2C is a little bit easier because of the amount how kind of packed in the sound is. And, you know, whereas the XX kind of just sounds all around you, and the 2C kind of takes all that sound and just crunches it in your face. And that can be really, really enjoyable, but it also makes treble just seem a little bit more attentive on the 2C. Although when you really crank up the volume on the XX and really kind of analyze it, I think they're relatively comparable. But if you put a gun to my head and ask me to pick one for treble, I'm gonna lean towards the 2C. And so all that's left is just the determination of what you think you would like and what represents the better value. And that's kind of an interesting argument for me, because I could say if these are the same price, the 2C is the better headphone. But a $200 difference, you know, that's a quarter of the 2C's cost. And I don't know if the 2C is 25% better than the EditionXX. You know, and luckily that's not my decision to make, because you're a grown-ass adult and you can do with your money what you will. I think that if you're one of these people who's really seeking the value of something and you really want to kind of eke out every little bit of value you can for your dollar, I think the XX is a great option. But I think if you want that just extra level, just a little bit more, a little bit better, a little bit, you know, here or there, just a little bit more, I think the LCD2C is the way to go. And for more information about the XX, I think the review will be coming out tomorrow or the next day of it. And it's a pretty interesting review. You should stick around, hit that subscribe button. And I'd love to see you comment below. Let me know what you're interested in the future, what you want to see from me, any questions you have.